welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual, and I'm joined by my co-founder and co-host, Paddy Mann. Morning, Paddy.
Good morning.
Morning. So in yesterday's episode, we shared why we don't start with reviewing candidates by looking at their CVs. Put simply, CVs are slow to review. They don't give us the information that we need, and CVs don't support a fair comparison of candidates. Fortunately, there's a better alternative. We ask 3 short questions that allow us to see if a candidate is likely to be a good fit for our organisation. This gives us a much faster and much more effective way to review candidates, and we typically rule out 70 to 80% of applications at this point, reducing the pile in some cases from 1,000, 2,000 down to a few hundred. So in today's episode, we're going to look at how you can continue to filter down your applicants in a way that minimizes stress and ends up with you hiring an A player for your team. So Paddy, we've got those candidates filtered down based on those 3 questions. What's the next step that we take them through?
Cool. So as you mentioned, when we're doing this for our own company, we may still have 200, 300 candidates coming through at this stage. But the same rules are going to apply even if you're dealing with much, much smaller numbers. What we're looking is for an effective way to continue filtering down the applicants and assessing them in a fair way. And we want to make great use of everyone's time. We want to provide a great experience for the candidate. Now, when we started the process, we put our job ad and described how to do that a couple of episodes ago to get a big pile of applicants. We then looked at how to ask 3 kind of simple questions rather than looking at CVs and why that would work so much more effectively. Now, if you kind of went deep on those questions, go, wait a minute, those questions are great at doing one thing. They're great at seeing if this person is a good fit for our organization. What they don't do is really demonstrate whether someone's got the core skills that we're looking for in this role. So if I'm looking for a software engineer, it hasn't told me whether they can actually do good code. If I'm looking for a salesperson, it hasn't told me if they're great at talking to people in sales meetings. If I'm looking for a marketer or any other area of the business, it hasn't shown the few key skills that I'm looking for. And so the next step is we want to start filtering that down. It's not worth, at this point, continuing to dig into whether they are a good fit for our values. We've got a hunch there. If we want to make great use of everyone's time, we now want to do a sense check and go to the other side and say, okay, what about the skills? Can you demonstrate in some ways that you're likely to have the skills that we're looking for in this role? And so we're gonna be doing another assessment or asking a few more questions. They're going to be simple questions again. To assess skills, it does take a little bit longer, and that's one of the main reasons that we kind of tested the fit with the organization first, because if we're going to lose 80% of the people those questions, it's not worth them looking at the skills. But we're going to look at how can we ask some more simple questions to do that second part of the equation, to look at the skills fit.
Awesome. And so to do that, there's a number of different ways in which that's theoretically possible. Let's look at when you're trying to do that at that stage. First, perhaps, what's the some of the common problems that happen here? Because the one that comes to mind for me is that, as you mentioned, we still don't want it to take too long. You've still got a lot of candidates at this stage. In the previous stage with the 3 questions, we talked about it typically taking us around 20 seconds to evaluate each candidate. At this stage, we don't want that to suddenly increase to 30 minutes or an hour. Indeed, we've in the past, I think we initially had an interview at that stage, but found that you've still got too many candidates there. And even though I think we did it as a 10-minute interview, it needs to be reduced. So help us see or demonstrate what are we doing at that stage, and we'll perhaps start to dig into where the stress is that we're kind of overcoming through that.
Cool. So you're right. There's a number of ways you can do it, and as we go through the rest of the process, they're going to get more and more involved to go deeper and get down to the few candidates who make it to a job hire. And at this point, we've still got a big pool of candidates, hopefully. But regardless of how big the pool of candidates is, there will be some candidates who just do not have anywhere near the level of skills that you're looking for. And I think most people who have done some interviewing have experienced the interviews where you basically, within the first few minutes, you have that moment where you go, yeah, this person isn't going to make it through. And it's really obvious why. And so one of the things that we're doing with the first three questions is looking for what were the red flags that would have told us later that they weren't going to be a good fit. And by asking questions that dig into their alignment with our values, we greatly reduce the pool of people who make it through to a time-consuming interview, both for us and them, but are clearly not going to be a good fit. And so we're going to be looking to do the same, but for skills. And probably best to illustrate it with an example. I can take it from the engineering perspective, and it'll be useful to come around and look at for other roles, because it's quite different how you would assess afterwards. Perhaps you can throw some in once I've looked at engineering.
Yeah, it's a different set of skills that you're looking for, right? So, so for engineering, what's the what are we asking them to do, and what does that mean for us on the team side of being able to assess it?
Cool. So we asked two questions. The first question, we asked them to write a simple piece of code which does something quite trivial. It's a kind of a function that will... there's a range of functions you can use. I'm trying to think of the exact example that we use, but essentially you're asking them to code something which is, for a good engineer, trivial. Like, incredibly trivial, and it would take anyone on your team that you respect a couple of minutes to work through and code. It's a simple piece of logic, but you will have a lot of applicants who don't have the experience or the capability. There'll be people for the engineering roles who are learning to code for the first time and just aren't familiar with the really basic stuff. And while there may well be a role for them and other companies and so on, in our company, when we're hiring engineers at the moment, we've got a very small team, and they need to be able to work independently at a high level. And so we're looking with that simple test, we actually remove probably 50% of applicants that have made it this far because they can't do it. And it's really, really, to anyone who we hire, it's just like, wait, people fail at this point? And so it's a really useful test, and it works brilliantly because for us it takes seconds to review. For the person doing it, only takes minutes to write. For some candidates, it will take them longer, and they will still struggle with it, and that's kind of okay, because if we'd done that in an interview, it would have been 10 times more painful to watch. It's still an effective way of doing it on both sides. We then follow it up with a second question. So there's two questions. One, which is just a kind of a trivial one, just to sense check, are we in the right ballpark? And then there's a second question. I believe in the instructions to the candidate, we're saying, look, if you struggle with the first one, then it's unlikely you're going to make it through. You don't need to go on to the second one. This is your choice. But the second one is a more detailed example. We set up with a kind of real life example of some code they might need to do. We say, we've got partner organizations all around the world, and we want to invite them to a party, but we're only going to do the ones that are within a certain distance of our office. And so it introduces a few different concepts, some kind of logical reasoning about the challenge and how they will approach it, some thinking about how they would structure the code, some thinking about how to deliver that in an effective way, and they're going to need to make some decisions about how far they go. And we give them a few pointers, but it's the kind of thing that we would expect a good candidate to be able to do within an hour. We wouldn't expect anyone to be spending more than a couple of hours, and we'll make that clear in the instructions. And it demonstrates a number of the core skills that we're looking for, and skills that we have, when we haven't done the exercise, have identified as being blockers to hiring them that we've identified later. And so in doing that, we've got these two questions, again, really, really quick for us to review. We're spending, because 50% of them fell on the first question, we're spending less than a minute for most, over half of the applicants. And then for the ones that make it to the second one, it can take a few minutes, but it's still a really time-effective way of reviewing and getting a really in-depth view of their capability in a way, of course, you would never get through a CV. And at the same time, for the engineer, yes, we are asking for some investment in time, but we were still looking at the most cost-effective way for their investment to only take people who are going to have a chance of making it to this point, and then looking at the most effective way to do that. And the engineers that go through the process, they appreciate that. They understand why it needed to happen at this point in the process.
Yeah, really nice. And as you say, for some candidates and submissions, it takes a minute or less to review, sometimes a few minutes. I know that essentially we average 2 minutes per submission for that particular, what we call the coding screener. And what's really powerful, of course, is because in fact, I was going something changed actually. So there was a time when the only people that could review those submissions were developers, and that one of the important things was that we don't take up a load of development time, because it's expensive. Generally, developers are the most expensive resource that we have in the company, and so you certainly don't want them to be doing half-an-hour interviews of candidates and developer coding tests and so on. So we managed to kind of reduce it to a couple of minutes per submission. However, I think it was maybe a couple of years ago, we actually challenged even that and said, can we create a set of rules, and particularly create recordings and use some examples to be able to essentially codify, like, what does a good answer look like, what does a bad answer look like, and so on. And so I think we now have a member of our team who doesn't have a coding background, who's able to screen both the coding submission and a later stage, actually, where I think they submit a recording or something like that of them doing some work as well. And so that's another great example of when you're dealing with the large number of candidates, you need to be able to process them at scale and be really efficient, right? Because otherwise it just completely derails and slows down the team. What are the other stress? Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, whatever scale you're doing this at, I'd emphasize that, we talk about it with a big pile of 1,000 candidates going in the top of the funnel, and you're not always going to have that.
Sure.
However, even if you have a few, I'll still go through the same stages, because these are both the first 3 questions of organizational value and this assessment for skills are incredibly effective ways of actually testing and seeing if they've got what you need to do your job, to do the job. What we're talking about here is that as you scale it up, there are ways to become more efficient as a team. And first, you're going to need to introducing a new process. You're going to essentially get the head of development to be running it and checking that the scoring and the way that it works is effective and is leading to the right people making it through. Once you've worked that out, you can start delegating it into the team to other developers who have that capability. And then, as we found, you can go beyond that. You can actually outsource and teach people who don't have a development background, because as you've tested it again and again and again, the rules become so apparent, and the cost saving of not derailing the engineering team is so great. Yeah,
indeed. No, absolutely. And as you say, it applies to other parts of the business too. And it's not just about the saving of the time. As you say, even if you didn't have that many candidates, it's still worthwhile taking them through it. And perhaps to illustrate that, if I talk about an example, another area of the business, so for example, for sales and customer support roles, the equivalent test that we do at that stage in the process would essentially be, in fact, we've iterated on it a few times, but the current version of it is that we get the person to send, I think it's a 1-minute video, maybe a 2-minute video, where they are recording their answer to a couple of questions. And particularly those questions relate to, I think, I know that what we're looking for from these questions is their passion and enthusiasm. We want to see, and their ability to communicate. So we want to see that come through, but also the questions and the area that are in relate to the business and the industry. So it's kind of showing that they're able to demonstrate passion for solving that problem. So for example, for For AirManual, it would be around, freeing up time and reducing stress in the business and so on. And we want to see that that's something that lights them up and that they can talk passionately about, because that's really important. Then when you're on conversations with customers, they can feel it if it's not authentic when you're talking about solving problems. And so we're looking for people that are passionate about those things and they show it. Equally, for Spider Gap, we want people that are really passionate about employee development and personal development and those sorts of things. So it's specific to the business. And I think with this step, again, it's not about looking for something that's cookie cutter out there. It's about identifying what's an appropriate way of really assessing the skills that we need for this role within this company, and being really specific about that, and doing so in a way that filters. And it's something we've iterated on, right? Like, I remember that when it wasn't a 2-minute video and instead it was a 10-minute conversation with, and we previously used a virtual assistant to do it, and it was a 10-minute conversation. That was fine. That worked well for us. But then we thought, I wonder whether we can do this as a video and make it even more efficient. And actually, it worked. It worked better in many ways. So it's really, really powerful. And as we've talked about, it's not just about the time saving. It's also that stress of when you've got someone. I remember in our early days of the recruitment process, I'd get onto an interview later on in the process, 30-minute, 45-minute interview, and within 5 minutes, it's clear that they're not going to be a good fit because if they're in the sales role, for example, they just can't communicate effectively enough, or they're not enthusiastic enough, or they struggle to answer questions on the fly, and as a result, that's going to be a bit of a problem in that particular role. You don't want to be finding that out when you're 5 minutes into a 45-minute scheduled interview. And although we structure the interview in such a way that there are some ways in which we can get out earlier, so that you can kind of cut the interview short if it's not going to be a good use of time for either of you, that creates quite a bit of stress for everyone involved, them as well as the people interviewing and so on. So it's a really powerful way to do that. We've talked about the how we're reviewing the skills fit before the first interview, and subsequently we can kind of cover other stages in the process and how we do that. But clearly what we're talking about here is making sure that you've done a little bit of values fit. You've now got assessing whether or not there are skills fit. But through the rest of the process, we're still going to be looking at that skills fit and values fit, right? It's an iterative kind of spiral that we go through. So is there anything else that we should cover on that before we kind of wrap up on this side? Because there's so much we go into, but I'm conscious that we can pick that up later.
No, I think that's great. If people are listening to this and they're in other departments, they're wondering how they would test it, or whether any of the ways that we've described are how specifically, what exact questions we asked, or templates, or anything else, then do reach out, because these are things we've managed to iterate on, and from experience we can speak as to what worked for us, given our roles, and we can share the reasoning that led us in that direction. But I think this is a fundamental thing that you've shared is we're looking for two things. We're looking for organizational values fit, we're looking for skills fit, and we're going to basically just iterate on those two, and at each stage try and make great use of everyone's time and be really, really fair. The example you shared where in the first 5 minutes you realise they're not going to be a good fit. Yes, it sucks for you. Yes, it sucks for the rest of the team, because they now face your wrath of, why on earth did this person make it through? Which is normally a process issue, not a people issue, and one that we've subsequently fixed. But it sucks for the person who's made it that far. They will feel misled that you've taken them through multiple stages at that point, and then they will feel that, oh man, I completely bombed at this point. Why did I even invest the time? So making these tweaks and bringing all these little bits forward, which you can start off with a good starting point based on what we're suggesting, but then iterate on it to improve it as you go along, will make such an impact for your team, for the person hiring, and for the people that are applying for roles.
Yeah, I love that. And exactly as you say, people feel free to reach out, add comments to social media, message us directly, email us at support@airmanual.co. We've got loads of examples of this. We've recruited into customer success positions, into finance administrator positions, into sales and developer roles and all sorts of different areas. And we've, iterated to come up with ways in which we test it. And it's not about sharing those so that you can just carbon copy those, as we've talked about. They need to be tailored, but we can take you through the logic so that you can see exactly how, from these are the things that you're trying to assess, and therefore this is how we did it, and very happily share some tips on based on what you're looking to hire. Let us know what's the role that you're looking to hire, what are the skills that you're looking to assess for, and what's your current thinking on what you can do, and we'll happily weigh in and give our 2 cents on what you can do. Brilliant. Well, we've covered how to get a large number of candidates down to a few, from thousands to hundreds in the previous episode. In this episode, we've shown how we've essentially taken couple of hundred candidates. We're able to reduce that pool, typically by certainly cutting it in half, but normally further, so that we're reducing 100 to 200 down to typically around sort of 30, right? So that we've got a much more manageable number going into rounds of interviews with us. We can cover in a separate episode how we do interviews and how we filter further. But you can see, again, using a small amount of time, we're able to filter based on what matters most. Fantastic. Well, as regular listeners will know, we also run a weekly webinar on how to free up 15 hours a week and remove the constant stress of running a business without slowing down growth. It's typically on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. UK time, but you can find out more and register at www.airmanual.co/webinar. Please do come and join me live. We tend to have quite small groups, so we get to do a lot of Q&A interaction, and people get a lot of value out of them. A final note for our podcast listeners: as a new podcast, we do need your help. If you found the content today valuable, please just take 1 minute to leave an honest review. This will help the podcast get more visibility and help more people. Ideally, 1 or 5 star, please. It makes a big difference. If you're listening to this on social media, please do repost, share. That makes a huge difference to us, and we hugely appreciate every single like and repost and so on that we get. It makes a big difference. Otherwise, until next time, have fun.